Welcome everybody, thank you for joining. I just wanted to make a quick announcement. We bought books that everybody could follow along. It costed us $9 a book. We're giving it for free, but on condition that you come back for the next 2 classes and join. And if you want to give a donation, you're more than welcome, but you can take it for free. Just please make sure you come back, because look, if you're taking it, that means you're coming back next 2 weeks. They're here in the box in the front. This summer learning program, first I want to thank Rabbi Silberberg for giving this amazing shir. It has another 2 weeks left to this program. Next week and the following week, then we conclude. Please encourage your friends and family members to come and join. Next week, 3 nights a week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and the following week. We have great shiurim going on, and you can learn on your own or follow a shir, and great dinners to accompany as well. Last thing I want to mention is I want to thank the sponsor of this week, who wants to be anonymous, but this is chus that we should have these galos of the Rebbe, and may it be taken to be anonymous. Thank you.
Okay, good evening, everyone. There are plenty of books. If you don't have a book, you can come take one over here. Last week, in last week's class, we spoke about one category of Torah Shebiksav. Sorry, of Torah Shebal Peh, which, if you recall, we spoke about the received category. Meaning, as we explained at length, that when Moshe Rabbeinu comes down from Har Sinai, having received the Torah Shebiksav, he didn't only receive the Torah Shebiksav. Along with that, also he received the explanation and the simple interpretation of everything that is said in Torah Shebiksav. That is one part, and that was faithfully transmitted from generation to generation until the times of Rabbi Yehuda Anasi was transmitted Baal Peh, after it was written down, still called Torah Shebal Peh. And we explained last week why that is, why it's necessary to have that, to have part of Torah, which is Torah Shebal Peh. Today we are going to be talking about another 2 or 3 categories in Torah Shebal Peh, and we'll start right away on page 40 in your book with a medrash from Medrash Tanad Ve'Eliyahu. It says as follows: both the written Torah and the oral Torah were given by Hashem. So what's the difference between them? So the Medrash gives a mashal. This can be compared to a king who has 2 subjects whom he loved very much, and to whom he gave each a measure of wheat and a bundle of flax. The wise subject took the flax and wove a beautiful cloth. He took the wheat, turned it into fine flour, sifted it, ground it, kneaded it, baked it, and set it upon the table, and spread the cloth, which he created from the flax, over it until the king came. But the foolish subject did nothing at all with what he was given. When the king returned to his palace, he said to his 2 subjects, "My sons, bring me what I gave you." The wise subject presented the bread made from fine flour with the cloth spread over it. The foolish subject presented raw wheat in a container with the raw flax on top of it. How great was the shame and disgrace. When Hashem gave the Yidden the Torah, he presented it only in the form of wheat and flax, leaving us to extract fine flour and to weave a garment. So the Torah Shebiksav is compared to the raw wheat and the flax. Torah Shebal Peh is the cloth that's made out of it and the bread that's made out of it. Now you think about it for a second. How foolish is the foolish subject? The king gave him something, so he thought to himself, what can be better than what the king gives me? I'm not touching it. I'm preserving it. To give a mashal, I'll give a little example. Imagine very soon said this class was given in the merit of the Hisgalus of the Rebbe. Very soon we'll have that Hisgalus. And the Rebbe will knock on your door, and the Rebbe will say, you know those Sfarim that I gave you, so can I see them? So you pull it out of the drawer, it's still in the plastic, perfectly preserved. You say, Rebbe, here, this is the Sefer that you gave me. Another person, the Rebbe knocks on the door and says, where's the Sefer? It's worn out. So one person can say, 1 second, I did a better job of safekeeping of the item that the Rebbe gave me. But I think anyone understands that the Rebbe didn't give a sefer to remain in the plastic and to be a museum piece. It depends what a person gives you. If the king gives a person an antique or a piece of art, yes, so you preserve it. But when the king gives someone flax and the king gives someone wheat, anyone with a little seichel realizes it's not meant to be flax, it's not meant to be wheat. It's meant to be transformed into something which is productive. When the Rebbe gives a sefer, it's meant to be used and to be learned from. And that's what Torah Sheba'al Peh is. Torah Sheba'al Peh is, instead of us saying, oh, we have the Torah, and we are going to preserve it exactly as it is, we're going to chazer every single word, we're going to repeat every single word and memorize every single word. We understand that the Torah ultimately was given to us as a raw material, which is meant to be developed. Now, for those who recall what we spoke about last week, we realized this is not really consistent with what we spoke about last week. Because last week, what did we say? Last week we said that Hashem gives Moshe Rabbeinu the Torah Sheba'al Peh, the interpretation, and that was faithfully transmitted from generation to generation. There is no processing there. There is no taking of raw materials and changing it or developing it. And that's because this Medrash is not talking about what we spoke about last week. Last week we spoke about the received part of the Torah. Rather, this Medrash is talking about, if you take a look at figure 2.1 on page 42, here we are introduced to the next category in Torah Sheba'al Peh, which we are going to call the derived category. The halachas that we derive from the Torah Shebiksav, and the halachas that we derive from the received Torah Sheba'al Peh. Now, how exactly these halachas are derived, how we derive things from Torah, we'll talk about that in a moment. But before we get there, the question has to become why? So as it turns out, now we have three different things. We have the Torah Shebiksav itself. We have the interpretation of the Torah Shebiksav, which Hashem gave to Moshe Rabbeinu, which Moshe Rabbeinu transmitted to Klal Yisrael. And then there are those things that we derive from the Torah, and the question is, why is that necessary? Why couldn't Hashem tell Moshe everything? Wouldn't that be better? Instead of us having to break our heads, our finite heads, and trying to figure out and derive things from the Torah, why couldn't Hashem, Kol HaNoisen Ba'ayin Yafa Noisen, He's giving us the Torah, just give it all to Moshe Rabbeinu. So the answer to this question, or at least the beginning of the answer, will be in text 2, which is a reading from, once again, the Hakdama of the Rambam to Pirush HaMishnayos. And the Rambam is going to draw on a certain pasuk to bring out a certain point. What is the pasuk? The pasuk is about Sukkahs, where Hashem tells Moshe, "Basukkahs teishu shivas yamim," you should live in Sukkahs for 7 days. So when Hashem told him that, He also told Moshe, as we mentioned, right? There's the received. A lot of the basic ideas were given to Moshe at Har Sinai. So He told this Moshe that this mitzvah is obligatory only for males, not for females. Hashem told Moshe that the sick and travelers are not required to fulfill this mitzvah. That the roof of the sukkah, the schach, must be made of something that grows from the ground. That the roof cannot be made of wool, silk, or any other item that does not grow from the ground. It also can't be made from mats or clothing, even if they were made from something that grows from the ground. All this Hashem told Moshe. And He told Moshe that what does it mean to live in the sukkah, that one has to eat, drink, and sleep in the sukkah for all 7 days. He also told Moshe that the size of the sukkah should be no smaller than 7 tfachim, 7 handbreadths long by 7 handbreadths wide, and that the sukkah should be no less than 10 tfachim in height. All of this was given over from Hashem to Moshe Rabbeinu. But there's still a lot of other questions about sukkah. For example, the Rambam says that Hashem told Moshe Rabbeinu that a sukkah has to be at least 10 tfachim high. But can I make a skyscraper sukkah? Is there a maximum height to a sukkah? What about if I decide, instead of building a sukkah, I realized that in Tammuz, I'd already built a hut in my backyard, a place where I can go and get some shade. And is that kosher for a sukkah? Hashem didn't tell that to Moshe Rabbeinu. Does a sukkah require a mezuzah? Hashem told Moshe Rabbeinu you have to eat and drink in a sukkah. What is the definition of eating and drinking? Can I have a cup of water outside the sukkah? So what we have over here is that while all the very basic ideas of a sukkah are included either in Torah Shebiksav itself or were given over to Moshe Rabbeinu, there are a lot of details which aren't included. And it's not only that there are a lot of details that aren't included, there are a lot of details in halachas that couldn't be included. Why? Because as times change and conditions change, there are different halachas. For example, let's move away from sukkah for a second. If I live in a mobile home, do I have to put up a mezuzah on it? Today, does DNA work for paternity testing? The video cameras, does that work instead of edus? We know that we have to save a life. Does that include advanced resuscitation methods which didn't exist back in the day? If I cross the international date line during Sfiras HaOmer, all of these things couldn't have been said at the time because these are issues that didn't exist at the time. Sorry?
Kiddush Levana on the Levana.
Kiddush Levana on the Levana. The idea is that to go and to enumerate every single possible impossibility, both that existed at the time, as well as that will exist to the end of time, if we're talking about, unless you're talking about a miracle, but we know that the Eibishter is not into doing miracles in this way, it's an impossibility. There has to be some sort of mechanism for us to be able to derive the halachas by ourselves. So again, the Torah Shebiksav came along with a basic understanding of everything and what it means, as mentioned last week, right? The esrig is the esrig. That Moshe Rabbeinu came down and said, Hashem told me that's what Pri Yitzhadar is. But all of this, so many different possible halachas, otherwise, those are things that have to be derived. If we want to look in what it says in the Sefer Ikrim, text 3, page 43, it says over there, it is impossible that Hashem's Torah could ever be complete in such a way that it would be sufficient for all times, for there are constantly new details, judgments, and events in human affairs, and the laws about these matters would be far too numerous to be enumerated. So therefore, we need to have a system how to be able to address all the other possibilities and scenarios that may arise. And this is something, by the way, which is, anyone who's familiar with the secular judicial system and the secular process of making laws, here we have today, we have 500 people sitting somewhere in Washington, D.C. What are they doing? They're making laws all day. Why are they making laws? They've been making laws for 250 years. But yeah, that's the way it works. There's always new scenarios, there's always new situations, and there's always new opportunities and different dilemmas that arise that need to be addressed. And that, in Yiddishkeit, lahavdil, and halacha is the same thing. That's why we need to have this second category of Torah Sheba'al Peh, which is called the derived. Okay. But what's the problem with this? What's the problem with having a part of Torah which is derived? Anyone? Sorry? People can make mistakes. And it's not only that. You can have people with an agenda. You can derive anything you want. How do we go about, how does the system of Torah and Halacha, how does it address the possibility, that anyone can come along and derive whatever they want? I mean, today we have that literally also in, if you ever look, the conservative movement and all their Piskei Dinim, they actually have bezdins that create Piskei Dinim with tshuvas, and they derive whatever they want. Why do they derive whatever they want? Because they already know the conclusion they want to arrive at. And then the question isn't what the halacha is going to be, the question is how I'm going to figure out how to derive it. So what protections are there against that? And just to illustrate this point, if you take a look at the exercise, the cute exercise on page 44, okay, so last week we had the Second Amendment, now we have the Third Amendment. I don't think we're going to have the Fourth Amendment next week. But the Third Amendment of the Constitution says as follows: no soldier shall in times of peace be quartered in any house without the consent of the owner, nor in time of war, but in a manner to be prescribed by law. Okay, which of the following statements do you think can reasonably be derived from this amendment? Take a look at these two statements over there. By the way, if anyone doesn't have a book, there's still plenty of books over here in the box over here. It should be unconstitutional for a school to forbid teachers and principals from taking outside employment. Can we derive that from this from the amendment? You say no. Okay. How about it should be unconstitutional for the government to issue rent control laws? Is that a reasonable derivation? Okay, whether or not either one of these are reasonable, the fact is both of these were argued in the court systems at various times. People were saying that because of the third amendment, it should be unconstitutional for schools to forbid teachers and principals from taking outside employment, or that it should be unconstitutional for the government to issue rent control laws. What's the point we're trying to bring out over here? That if you twist and turn enough, you can derive anything from anything. So this becomes especially challenging when we take into consideration text 4, which is really the first line of the first text that we read tonight from Medrash Tanna Develio, which says, Mikra umishna shneyem epi agvura nemru, which means that Torah Shabbat is from Hashem. Which means that not only are we saying that the Chachamim have the power to derive, but actually we're saying that whatever they derive is from Hashem. How do we know that? How do we know that when the Chachamim came along and derived something in a certain way, that it's from Hashem, and that was the original intent? And the answer to this question can be found in text 5 from the Medrash HaGadol. These are the rules that you, Moshe, shall set before them. Rabbi Shmuel says, these are the Yud Gimel Midais Sha'atayra Nedreshes Behen. These are the 13. I have no idea how to pronounce this word. Someone can help me? Hermeneutic? Sounds right? What? Sounds good. Hermeneutic rules of Torah derivation. I also don't know what it means, but which were given to Moshe at Sinai. Which means Hashem didn't say, here's the Torah, the written Torah, the received Torah, and you derive from this whatever you want. You know, oh, I'm looking at this mitzvah, well, I'm deriving from this, that something else must be true also. But rather, Hashem gave us very concrete rules of how we are meant to derive halachas from the Torah. Here we have 13. Elsewhere we have 32. There are many different rules. And how does that help us? Okay, so to explain to you how it helps us, if you turn for a second to figure 2.2, by raise of hands, who over here knows how to do Sudoku puzzles? Okay, we're going to have a contest. Let's see who can do this quicker, the quickest. Your pens? You again don't have a pen. Okay, I'm also going to do mine, by the way, while you guys are doing yours. I think I have a pen. I won. He has an extra pen if you want. Okay. The rules of the Sudoku puzzle? Okay, I already, by the way, filled in my top. I filled in my top one. I see everyone's taking a long time. Let me tell you how I filled in my top rows. Okay, I have over here 1, 2, D, Ches, $, smiley face, check X 94 41 ampersand Yud Mem Nun Kuf J X and Z. That's what I have. No one else has that?
I'm off by 1.
You're off by 1. Okay.
Yeah.
Did I do anything wrong over here?
Yes.
Why? It's empty spaces. It's left for me to fill in.
Well, if you want.
And if I did use the rules, then what? What would I gain by that?
Well, you're not playing Sudoku. You're filling in
This analogy, this muscle that of the Sudoku puzzle actually was thought up of by Rabbi Yitzi Horowitz, Refuah Shalema B'Karav Mamish. And it brings out a very important point. He says, Torah Shebiksav leaves a lot of gaps. There's empty boxes, and we have to fill them in. But we can't fill them in with whatever we want to fill them in. That would be like me, the way I filled in my Sudoku puzzle. Rather, there are rules of how you fill them in. If I were to follow the rules of the Sudoku puzzle and fill in all the numbers properly with all the rules, which I don't have to get into right now, the numbers that I'm filling in, are they my numbers? I'm actually arriving at the original intent of the one who made the puzzle. So on the one hand, I am filling them in. These are blank. I am filling them in. But once I fill them all in, or once I fill any one of them in, if I'm following the rules, all I am doing is discovering the numbers that are meant to be there. That's exactly, sorry? That's exactly, right, Judaism decoded. That's exactly what happened. Hashem gives us a Torah, and there's a bunch of empty spaces. And then he gives us the rules, just like Sudoku has rules, right? It has to be 1 through 9 in every single cell, and every single larger cell. You can't repeat a number. And he says, here are the 13 rules, Kal v'chomer, Gzeira Shava, Binyanav, etc. When you follow these rules and you're going to fill in the empty spaces, you are going to arrive at exactly what I wanted it to say. So here we have, and that's why we say that Mikra or Mishnah Shneim Epi Agvura Nemru. Because yes, Torah Shebal Peh, even the derived Torah Shebal Peh, is also from Hashem. How can you say it's from Hashem? We're filling it in. Sudoku puzzle. Yes, we're filling it in, but it's from Hashem. We are only filling in the numbers and the exact numbers in the cells the way He told us to do so. The next part of this lesson we are going to skip. Because we are today going to be doing in this book lesson 2 and lesson 3. So the next part of this book is going to be giving some examples of what is Kal v'chomer and what is Binyan Av. They seem to be something simple, but it's actually a little more complex. But we are going to skip it. Suffice it to say, we have these 13 rules, and the Chachamim implemented these rules in deriving many halachas from the Torah by following these rules. Sorry? We explained that. That was the first thing that we explained. We asked, why is it not written in the Torah? And that was the Ikrim said. It's impossible for it to address every single scenario and every single detail that is going to be. Okay, so, at the same time, sorry? Machlokes b'Sham v'Bisil next week is going to be the topic of Machlokes. Okay, but you're onto something. If you realize beforehand, I didn't say this at the time, but if you realize beforehand, when we spoke about Sukkah, so we said there's a bunch of things that are Hashem told us, and then I said, how about how tall a Sukkah should be, right? And I said those are not. Why? Because those are things where there's machlokes. That's how we know it wasn't derived. But leave that for next week. The idea of machlokes, which by the way seemingly goes against everything we're talking about, we'll talk about machlokes next week. And next week we might have to actually revise the Sudoku mashal, as we'll see. Okay. So the question now becomes, okay, we understand why it's necessary to have this derived part of Torah. Because absent some sort of incredible miracle, it would be impossible for Hashem to teach Moshe every single possible scenario till the end of generations, and then for Moshe to give it over to Klal Yisrael. You think about it for a second. Go through your Svarim Shafa, the thousands and thousands and thousands of Svarim, the Shilas Chuvas, the Chidushim, right? If there wasn't derived, then all of that would have to be told to Moshe. Moshe would have to teach that to all of Klal Yisrael, and that had to be transmitted orally throughout the generations. It's an impossibility. We also understand how it works, that even though Taka we derive, but ultimately, it's not that we're making up things, we're following the rules, and we follow the rules, we're revealing what the Ratzon Elyon is, what Hashem wants. But the question still remains, is this a necessary evil? Wouldn't it have been better theoretically if Hashem Taka told us everything? In other words, we understand why it's not naturally possible for that to happen, why there has to be this derived part. But can we concede at least that it's a necessary evil? And the Rebbe explains that no, it's not a necessary evil at all. And the Rebbe brings down we have the famous mashal in text 10a, which we're not going to read, but it's the mashal about Matan Torah. That what happened in Matan Torah, there was the bittul of the Gzeira. That there's the Gzeira, that there was Elyonim and there's Tachtoinim. There is the spiritual and there's the physical, and those two cannot, or you might say the godly and the physical, and those two remained distinct entities that could not meld and mesh together and become one. And then we have Matan Torah, when that divide was conquered. Where in Torah do we find that divide conquered? So let's read a Sukkah from the Rebbe, text 10b, page 54, where the Rebbe says as follows. The difference between Torah Shebiksav and Torah Shebal Peh is that Hashem spoke the Torah Shebiksav and Moshe wrote it. It was given completely from above. Whereas the Torah Shebal Peh requires human contribution. A student must toil intellectually to introduce novel Torah ideas. The truth, however, is that the derived Torah Sheba'al Peh was also given at Har Sinai, meaning even that which people comprehend with their own minds is Hashem's Torah, as explained earlier. Thereby, the purpose of the giving of the Torah is met, that there should be a bonding of the lofty with the mundane. When we introduce Torah concepts from our own minds, Hashem's Torah becomes our Torah. To put this in simple words, there seems to be two possibilities. There's an Elyonim possibility, a Tachtonim possibility. Tachtonim possibility is very simple. A human-made legal system or judicial system is Tachtonim. It might be nice, it might be good, but it's Tachtonim. It's a product of human beings. And then there's Elyonim. Elyonim is Hashem's Ratzon, Hashem's legal system. Now, if Hashem were to give us his legal system, all the mitzvahs of the Torah, and all we were to do is accept it, receive it, and memorize it, what we're essentially doing is we're being mevatel ourselves, and we're being a recipient to the Elyonim. But there isn't the bonding or the unity of your Elyonim and Tachtonim. There is the abnegation and the rejection of Tachtonim in favor of Hashem, whatever you say. Hashem didn't want that. The idea of Matan Torah, the Dira B'Tachtonim, means we have this ultimate union. What does the ultimate union mean? I work in my mind a human-made halacha, and the result of my halacha is what? Is Hashem's Ratzon. I am busy toiling and I'm working with my seichel, with that seichel of Tachtonim, and what is the conclusion that I arrive at? I'm deriving a halacha which is Hashem. That's the ultimate unity, that my mind is fully expressing and actually revealing the Ratzon HaElyon. And this is an incredible thing. It's so incredible that it's not something which is the domain of the few or the scholarly or the great. This is something every single Yid has to do. Every Yid has to harvent Torah and derive things from Torah. As the Alter Rebbe says in Igeres HaKodesh Siman Chavav, text 11, every one of us is able to reveal secrets of wisdom, to reveal and to innovate new insights in halacha, agada, in nister, and in Kabbalah. Indeed, we are obligated to do so in order to perfect our souls. So this is something which, many of us think that, all I have to do is I have to sit and learn something and figure something out. But essentially, when you're learning something, what you're doing is it's not about you, your mitzias. You're absorbing something outside of you, and you're kind of repressing yourself. Where do we find the ultimate connection with Hashem and with Torah? Is when you use your brain and you innovate and you come up with chidushim and you derive things, and every single Yid is mechuyev to do so. Okay, before we move on to the next category of Torah Sheba'al Peh, just one interesting thing, which is that up until now we've explored the derived part of Torah Sheba'al Peh, the received part of Torah Sheba'al Peh, and the derived part of Torah Sheba'al Peh. Interestingly, there is also an intersection and overlap in between the two. And we are going to see an example of that right now. If you look at text 12a, the Rambam writes, this is in Hilchos Mamrim, the Torah states, you shall not cook a kid in its mother's milk. Okay. Pashut Pshat, if you're reading it simple, what does it mean? I'm not allowed to take a goat, and I'm not allowed to cook it in its mother's milk. So it's three things, right? It has to be a goat, and the prohibition is against cooking, and in what milk? In its mother's milk. However, the received oral Torah, if you look in the Hebrew, Mepi Hashmua Lamdu, remember I told you last week, whenever you see in the Rambam, more than 200 times in the Rambam, whenever you see in the Rambam the words Mepi Hashmua, that means that's something which Moshe Rabbeinu came down from Har Sinai. When Moshe Rabbeinu came down from Har Sinai, and he said, I want you to know it means, the pasuk means to forbid both the cooking and the eating of any milk with any meat. So all three things are not the way they are, not the way they seem. Okay. That's what Hashem told Moshe Rabbeinu, just like I think last week we said, right? When Moshe comes down and says, ayin tachas ayin, shein tachas shein, an eye for an eye, Moshe comes down and says, I want you to know that when Hashem taught me this pasuk, he meant this, he taught that it means that it's payment. We're mekabel, just like we're mekabel Torah, we're mekabel the Mepi Hashmua. However, there's an interesting Mechilt text 12b, which says as follows. The pasuk says, you shall not cook a kid in its mother's milk. This prohibits cooking the mixture, and through a kal v'chomer, we derive that one may not eat this mixture. So, for example, let's say you walk into the kitchen on Friday afternoon, and you see a cake, which your wife just made, and your wife says, don't touch it. Are you going to say, okay, but I could eat it? Don't try that. That's a kal v'chomer, right? Ma'adach, you can't touch it, right? Ma'adach, you can't touch it. For sure you can't eat it. So the Torah doesn't have to say, don't eat it. When it says le'sevashel, we use a kal v'chomer, which we know the kal v'chomer is one of the shleish esrei midas hatayra d'rashbam. It's one of the 13 tools that were given to derive halachas of the Torah. And we know that you're not allowed to eat it. But 1 second. The Rambam just said that it's mepi hashmua, that it's derived, that it's received. And the Mechilta is saying that it's derived. Which one is it? So the Rambam says, if you look into text 12c, the Rambam says, there are laws that were received from Moshe, but the sages, the Chachamim, proved them by means of the 13 rules. The ingenious structure of a particular passage in the Torah enables us to find hints for specific received laws. So this is interesting overlap. We could talk about why the Eibishter would do this, and he would give it to us in two different ways. But the mitzvah is that sometimes you'll have something which is received, and the Chachamim, nevertheless, they went and they derived it also. So with that, we've concluded, again, the first two categories of Torah. Maybe take if there's anyone else near you that can use also. And now we are going to move on to the third category of Torah Sheba'al Peh. And that takes us to the next lesson, to lesson 3. And we will start on page 70, where we have some familiar brachas. You have one bracha of Asher Kitshad b'mitzvaysa v'tzivanu lahadlik ner shel Shabbos Kodesh. You have the bracha of lahadlik ner Hanukkah, and the bracha of al natilas yadayim. Everyone over here presumably knows that none of these things are written in the Torah. There's nowhere in the Torah where it says that we're supposed to light candles for Shabbos. There's nowhere in the Torah where it says to light candles for Hanukkah, obviously. Hanukkah was instituted after the chasima of Torah Shebiksav, after Torah Shebiksav was already completely ratified, another word, okay? And the Tilas Yadayim was not something that's midrabanan. So the obvious question is, how do we, with a straight face, say Asher Kiddushanu b'mitzvaysa, we turn to Hashem and say that you sanctified us with your commandments and commanded us to wash our hands. Hashem never commanded us to wash our hands. What does that mean? And this is actually a question that the Gemara asks, Masechta Shabbos, text 1. This is the Gemara there is talking about lighting Chanukah and later. The Gemara says, what bracha is recited? And the Gemara answers, you make the bracha, but the Gemara says, where did he command us? So Rabbi Avia said, in the pasuk of Loi Sasur, which means you shall not divert or move away from the words of the Chachamim. What is the context of this statement? Let's look at the actual psukim, where this comes from. Text 2, page 72. So this is from Parsha Shoftim, where it says, if a matter eludes you in a case involving capital punishment litigation, saras, a case where there's a dispute in your cities, then you shall set out and go up to the place that Hashem shall choose. You shall come to the Kehanim from Shevet Levi, and to the judge who will be in those days, and you shall inquire, and they will tell you the words of judgment. You shall do according to the word they tell you, from the place that Hashem will choose, and you shall observe to do according to all they instruct you. You shall do according to the law they instruct you, and according to the judgment they say to you, you shall not divert from their word that they tell you, which is leisatzer, neither right nor left. Now, is there something interesting about the final paragraph, the last pasuk? We need to derive some stuff over here. Is it necessary, the last pasuk? Is there, what new is said over there that was not said in the previous 3 psukim? Okay, so one is a lav and one is a mitzvah. Okay, then you don't need this the last half of the pasuk. Or the first half of the pasuk. In other words, it says, "V'shamarta lasi chila sheyirucha al pi haTorah sheyirucha v'al mishpash yom l'chatasa." That's a repetition. So from this, Chazal learn that this last pasuk is telling us something different, which is the first three psukim are telling us that whenever we have a question and we don't know what to do in a halacha, we don't know what does the Torah have to say about it, so we have to go to the Sanhedrin. Sanhedrin tells us what the halacha is. Either they know it because it was received, either they know because they sit down and they derive the halacha, but they come with an answer. But then there's another category, and the other category is, and that's what's talked about in the last pasuk, is that the Sanhedrin have the power to make takanas. Not that it is not received, it is not derived, but for various reasons that we are going to talk about, and this is going to be the third category of Torah Shebal Peh. Again, not something which was received, and not it was derived. Sanhedrin, looking at around what's going on at that time and in that place, have the right to establish takanas, and when they do so, there's a mitzvah of leisasrim and adavar shayidu lacha. We are not allowed to, in any which way, divert from that which they say. Everything here is based on, yeah. And that's what, as the Rambam says, text 3, it follows, therefore, that we mean to say, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvosav. He sanctified us with His commandments and commanded us to listen to those who commanded us to kindle the Hanukkah light. So when we're making a bracha on something which is midrabanan, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvosav, He sanctified us with His mitzvahs. V'tzivanu, and what did He command us? He commanded us to listen to those who told us to light Hanukkah candles. And that leads us again to the third category, figure 3.2, page 74. The third category is legislated, new laws that were legislated by the rabbinic sages. Okay. And again, as we continue in today's lesson, we're going to give different examples of different takanas that the Chacham gave. But before we do so, there's a larger question, but you might want to say a theological question to ask, which is, does Hashem really care that we should light Hanukkah candles, or does He care that we should listen to the Chachamim? You understand the distinction between the two? To use an example, and this is actually very current in terms of what the Supreme Court is doing in different ways. We know that there are different government agencies. So, for example, let's say there's the EPA, which is literally just recently there was a ruling by the Supreme Court about this, or the FDA. And they are empowered by Congress to make certain rules, to make rules in their area, in their domain. So when the FDA, for example, when they issue a rule in a certain area, if you are going to violate that rule, that's a federal crime. Why? Because they are empowered by the United States Congress to make these rules. Now, if you go over to one of the congressmen or congresswomen and ask them, this rule, did you make this rule? They say, no, I didn't make this rule. So how's it a federal law? Well, it's important for us that we put into place the proper authorities, because otherwise you have anarchy and chaos. And if that's what they said, you have to listen to them because we empower them to make those laws. Is that so you could say the same thing. The Eibishter gave the Torah. And in the Torah, you have the written Torah, and then you have, as we mentioned, the received Torah, and you have the received Torah Shebal Peh, then you have the derived Torah Shebal Peh, and then Hashem realized there's still going to be other stuff which are not addressed in any of this. We need to empower a prestigious body to be able to address things which are not included in any of these things, and you have to listen to them. Does that mean in other words, we know received is directly what Hashem wants. We know derived is also directly what Hashem wants. Remember, it's a local puzzle. But in this part, the legislated, we can say possibly that no, it's not that Hashem really wants me to wash hands. It's possible that Hashem was looking when the Chacham said wash hands, and Hashem was like, I don't think it's so important. But you know what? They got to do it because this is the system that I set up, right? This is the system. I think we all intuitively know the answer to this question, but let's see what the Medrash says on this. In text 4, the Medrash Tanchuma says, a person should not say, I will not comply with the takanas of the Chachamim because they're not Torah laws. Hashem tells such a person, my child, it is not proper to say this. Rather, obey all that they tell you. As it says, Vasisa al pi Torah sheyirucha, you shall do according to the laws that they instruct you. Why? Lama? She'af al divrei ani maskim. Because I agree with their words. I agree with their words, not I agree with their authority. I agree with their words. Which means, in very simple words, that when the Chachamim make a takana, we believe that there's a sayata deshmaya involved over there, that they are takem mikaven to the Ratzon Elyon. So it's not just Hashem put a system in place, and whatever they say we have to do, but rather actually, when we're doing it, we say, we know the taka, the Eibishter wants us taka to wash our hands before we eat bread. There's a story which the Rebbe said on several occasions about the Noidei Yehuda. The Noidei Yehuda was a Rav in the city of Prague. And he had, as is the case with anyone who's worth anything, he had his detractors and his people who were against him. And they used to torment him. And one of the ways they tormented him was by presenting him with difficult shilas and halacha. And they're hoping that one day he's going to stumble and make a mistake, and then boom. And he was always answering the questions good. And one day, he stumbled and he made a mistake, said something wrong. And there was a big tumult in the city. And when the Neder Yehuda found out about it, he says, relax everyone. That question, I'm telling you, it was not negated, it was a fake question. Even though it was presented to me as a real question, it was a fake question. So they asked him, how do you know? He says, because when I'm paskening, when a Rav paskens something in a real situation, there's the siyata deshmaya over there to make sure he gets it right. If I got it wrong, it has to be it was fake. They made a birur, they made an investigation, and they found a taka. It was not a real scenario that was being addressed. What? Above it might say, yeah. There's also something similar, the famous Ramban about a bizarre halacha, seemingly bizarre. But it gave to Edom Zaymimin, that the Edom Zaymimin get punished so long that the verdict was not actually implemented. If kasher zaman v'loy kasher rasa, if the verdict was implemented, they don't get punished. So what's pshat? Different answers. I mean, obviously, it doesn't seem to be logical. But what the Ramban says that if the verdict was implemented, and we know that Elokim nitzav ba'adas kel, that whatever psak comes from the Sanhedrin or from a Bezdin is from the Eibishter, it must be the person deserved to die, or whatever other punishment the person got. Okay, so what are examples of the different takanas in the different areas that the Sanhedrin made? Okay, so by the way, that the Chachamim made over the ages. We already bumped into three of them, and they are Hanukkah, Ner Shabbos Kodesh, and Til Sidan. Very good. Okay, so as we'll see, there are many different categories, different types of takanas. The first one we're going to do is one which is Tikkun Olam, text 5, page 78, where the Mishnah tells us, Ein poidenes hashvuyim yasher al demein b'pnei Tikkun Olam, for the purpose of Tikkun Olam. You have to get that in there. Societal remedy, we do not redeem captives for more than they're worth. So back in the day, this was something which was an unfortunate part of life, is they had people who would capture people, pirates or others, and slave traders. And we know there's a mitzvah, Pidyon Shvuyim. Pidyon Shvuyim is one of the greatest mitzvahs that there is. It's the greatest tzedakah possible, and we can understand why, what it means to live a life in captivity. There's halachas about tzedakah. We're not allowed to change tzedakah from one to another. It's like you'd say, but for Pidyon Shvuyim, you can raid all your tzedakah pushkas in your house according to halacha. I'm not a Rav, I'm not paskening, but I'm telling you as a state that you can raid all your pushkas because it's the greatest tzedakah possible. And Yidden always were good at Pidyon Shvuyim. However, came down Chazal and say there is a price, a standard price on the slave market for people, based obviously on certain criteria. I'm assuming age and strength and the various skills the person possesses, and we are not allowed to pay more than that value for someone. Now, that's very harsh. The Chachamim said that's Tikkun Olam. First of all, they said you'll break the back of communities. The communities are not going to have the resources to be able to pay the exorbitant prices which the slave traders are going to charge. And also what you're going to do is you're going to incentivize the slave traders actually to target Yidden, because they'll realize that Yidden have a mitzvah Pidyon Shvuyim and they pay whatever is necessary. So it's a very interesting case. We know that there's always this tension that exists between individual rights or the value of the individual and communal and the I want to use the word rights, but the interests of the individual versus the interests of the community. And in this particular case, Chacham came down squarely on the side of the community, and they said it can't happen. That's not derived, it's not received. That's a takana the Chachamim came up with based on the circumstances of their time. There are other takanas Chazal made, and this is very many of them, which was called asus yag la Torah, to make a fence around Torah. Certain takanas are made so to prevent us from doing averos. So one example of this, text 6, But the Rambam says, when Amnon raped Tamar, so David HaMelech and his Bezdin prohibited yichud with a pnuya, with an unmarried woman. In other words, there was already a previous Bezdin that had made an isur of yichud with an erva, such as a married woman. But when the story of Amnon and Tamar happened, they realized we need to go further. And that's when the prohibition against yichud pnuya, of having yichud, even with a woman who's a pnuya, which is not really it's not an isur kares or anything, that was established. So that's a kind of takana which the Chazal made to keep someone away from doing averos, to cause us to avoid certain situations wherein averos can happen very easily. What are other examples of takanas Chazal made which are in this area to keep us away from averos? Any other thoughts? Sorry, muktzah is a great one. Very good. Muktzah is a great example. Okay. Another example of an area where Chazal said something to keep someone away from doing an avera. We already learned earlier today that min haTorah, right? Any meat is not allowed to. You're not allowed to have it together with milk. How about chicken? See, I think we have chicken in the back over here. Can a person have chicken with a cup of milk? Okay, we all know the answers. But where does that come from? Again, that's not received. That's not derived. So where does that come from? So Chazal made a very simple svara. The pasuk le'sevashel gedi b'chalei v'imah is a very confusing pasuk. Again, because it's about a goat in its mother's milk, and nevertheless we say we extend it to all meat. The problem is that there are a lot of people who call chicken meat. It's part of the same category. So what's going to happen if chicken is permitted? So if you're allowed to have chicken with a cup of milk, people are going to come and say, "Why am I allowed to have chicken? Even though it's basar, but why am I not allowed to have it? It must be because it's not gedi. Because it's not gedi." So the Chachamim decided it's going to bring confusion. We're banning anything that can be called meat, because the moment you start making distinctions, we're worried that people are going to make other distinctions which are incorrect. In the words of the Rambam, text 7, it is a decree. In other words, the reason why we don't eat milk and chicken, it is a decree. In other words, legislated by the Chachamim, it's not received or derived, lest the matter lead to harm. People might say, fowl with milk is permitted. Why? Because the pasuk only forbids a goat in its mother's milk. Similarly then, the meat of all animals is permitted with the exception of a goat. Another will add, even the meat of a goat is permitted with goat's milk, as long as the milk is not from its mother. For the pasuk only says its mother. So to avoid this confusion, the Chachamim made a blanket isur and said, you can't have also, yeah. And this is something which is not only, sorry?
The time separation is also not the doraisa. People have some, the Sfardim, I think, wait 5 hours, we wait 6. Different communities wait a certain amount of time before they meet and they milk after meat.
Right. Okay, so I think that by the time we finish today's lesson, we'll have a little more clarity on that. Okay?
Confusion is not the people confusion, the pasuk is confusing.
Right. And because the pasuk confusing,
It's not the people's fault.
Verstehe. But the Chazal had to make that correct. What you're saying is correct. Now, this is not something that, it's not only something that the Chachamim are allowed to do, this is something which they're mandated to do. As the pasuk says, and the Gemara says, the pasuk says, "Ushmartem b'smishmarti," which means you shall safeguard my charge. This means that the Torah is telling us, make a fence around my charge. Chachamim are, again, not only empowered, but they're obliged to actually to make takanas to protect people against doing averos. Okay. When were most of these takanas made? We're saying Chazal made legislation, a lot of different legislation. So most of the legislation was made during the time of the second Beis HaMikdash. Why during the time of the second Beis HaMikdash? So the Rebbe explains, text 9, there were many fences and boundaries that Chachamim enacted, mainly during the Zman, the time of Bayis Sheni. Why is that? Because the era of Bayis Rishon was marked by Gili Elokus, a revelation of Hashem. This revelation remained in some respects even during the 70 years of Galus in Bavel. But during the time of the second Beis HaMikdash, the sacred light was lacking and the darkness of the Klippa intensified. Chachamim therefore enacted fences and boundaries to overcome the great darkness. Therefore, from one generation to the next, as the darkness intensifies, we correspondingly add protections and boundaries. So this is something which is, the more gili there is, the less concern and worry there is that we are going to mess up and by mistake do Averis. But as there was a Yeridas Averis, that's something which we know in Yiddishkeit, we believe there's this concept called Yeridas Averis. As the generations progress, we, while the Goyim believe in evolution, we believe in devolution. It's the opposite way around. So therefore, it becomes more necessary as the ages continue to make more and more different takanas. Then there are other takanas which Chazal made, and by the way, as we'll see soon, starting with Moshe Rabbeinu. And some of them are not to keep people away from Averis. Some of them are not even about Tikkun Olam. Here's another example. Text 10. Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch. While the Beis Hamikdash stood, the early Chachamim legislated that the Darshanim should begin to publicly teach the halachas of the Yom Tov 30 days before the Yom Tov begins. There we go. Takana. It's a halacha. It's not about keeping away from Avera, but again, the Chachamim saw there was a certain need. People, Yom Tov were approaching, and people didn't know exactly what to do. So therefore, they placed this obligation on the Darshanim that 30 days before Yom Tov comes along, that they should start speaking about what's the lashon Shel and V'dershin B'hilchas HaChag 30 days before the Yom Tov. Then we have a very interesting one, is that text 11 from the Gemara. Upon the descent of the Mon, Moshe instituted the recitation of Birchas Hazan, the first bracha of Birchas Hamazon. So we know that Birchas Hamazon is Midiraisa. But Moshe, he was the one who was Misakin. After the Mon came down, he decided there should be a certain specific nusach to the bracha, and the nusach that we have of Hazan Ha'olam, the first bracha of Birchas Hamazon, was established by Moshe Rabbeinu. And there are many other takanas. So for example, we have takana of reading from the Torah Mondays and Thursdays, also a takana of Moshe Rabbeinu, who decided there shouldn't be 3 days passed without learning Torah. So again, all this, someone's going to ask you, why are you reading the Torah Monday? It's in Torah Shabbat. No. Is it received? No. Derived? No. Takana from Moshe Rabbeinu. Ezra came along and decided Shabbos afternoon also read from the Torah. And this is, again, a huge, huge part of Torah Shabbat Pam, are the various takanas throughout the ages that Chazal made, which, as we already explained, even though the Chazal made them, but Hashem says, what were the words? Af ani maskim, the exact words that we had. Sha'af al divreim ani maskim. Ultimately, we believe that the Chazal were mekaven to the Ratzon Elyon with every single one of these takanas. And again, as we mentioned, also you have Hadlakas Ner Shabbos Kodesh, Netilas Yadayim, Chanukah, Chinuch, by the way, very interesting. Chinuch is it's not, Chinuch is Midrabanan. When we say it's Midrabanan, what does that mean? But we have to understand. Received and derived are Midiraisa. Even though the Torah Shabbat Peh, they're Midiraisa. We'll talk about this a little more next week. Do you understand that? Because this is from the Torah. Chinuch, we know that in Minat Torah there's a mitzvah of this week's Parsha. In tomorrow's Chitas, V'shinantam levanecha v'dibarta bam. The father is commanded to teach his son Torah. But Minat Torah, a father doesn't have to teach his children how to do mitzvahs. Chacham came along and gave a mitzvah of chinuch, which is that a father has to teach his children and train his children in doing mitzvahs. Okay. This is all nice and good. However, there's a problem, which is that there seems to be a pasuk in the Torah which all of this runs afoul of. And that is text 12, page 82. The pasuk says, also the sixth parsha, right? You shall not add to the word I command you, nor shall you subtract from it. Le'seisifu and le'sigru. Right? You must keep all the commandments of Hashem, which I am instructing you. The Torah says, don't add anything. So how are the Chacham coming along and adding things? Takanas. So the Rambam explains, text 13, if a Bezdin would forbid fowl with milk, saying that it is included in the category of kid, in other words, of gidi, and therefore it is biblically forbidden, that would be adding to the Torah. That would be a leisesif. If, however, the Bezdin says the Torah permits fowl with milk, permits it, we are prohibiting it, and we will notify the people of this is decree that aims to prevent transgression. This is not called adding, but this is called making a fence around the Torah. When the Torah says don't add, that means Chachamim don't have the power to come along and say, this is a mitzvah which is in the Torah. There's only 613 mitzvahs in the Torah. But the Chacham come along and say, we are, however, we are adding our own takana based on the authority the Torah gave us, but it's not minat Torah. And in order to make this distinction very clear, there are certain halachas there are certain things that distinguish and that which is either from the Torah, shebiksav, or received or derived, as opposed to takanas, that which is derabanan. So, for example, there's a famous thing of sveika. What do we have? Text 14. Gemara says any doubt regarding a biblical law is dealt with strictly, and any doubt regarding a rabbinical law is dealt with leniently. So, very simple to put it in very simple words. That so let's say we know that if you have a fleshige soup, okay, and some milk went into it, so is the soup kosher or not? Okay, so we all something that's simple halacha, everyone knows. Is there shishim? Is a bottle b'shishim? Is there 60 times the fleshigs over the milk? If yeah, it's bottle. If not, and the whole thing is kosher, and if not, the whole thing is treif. But what if some milk fell into my fleshige soup, and I don't know if it's shishim or not? I'm not sure. It was a little, but I don't know exactly. What's the halacha then? So then it depends. If it's a meat soup mamish, then we say sveika deiraisa l'chumra, then it's treif. But if it's a chicken soup, then it's kosher. Why? Because sveika derabanan, a suffix in a derabanan is l'kula. Who decided this? The Chachamim decided this. Midei Raisa, Sveika Dei Raisa is L'kula. Midei Raisa, you can always be mekel in a suffix. The Chachamim wanted to make a hecker. They wanted to make you understand, yes, this is what the Torah is saying, and this is what we're saying. We're authorized by the Torah to obligate it, but it's us. One of those things that they put in place so that we should never confuse what is a minat Torah and what is midrabanan is this idea of sveika deraisa l'chumra and sveika derabanan l'kula. Okay. Remember what we asked earlier today. How do we know the Chachamim, what they derive is all good? So we answered with a Sudoku puzzle. But now that we're talking about Gzeiris and Takanas, we have the question again. What prevents an overzealous extremist Bezdin from standing up and making harsh, extreme Gzeiris and Takanas on Klal Yisrael? So the answer to that is alluded to in the next text 15 from the Gemara. Rabbi Shmuel ben Elisha said, from the day the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, it would have been improper to prohibit eating meat and drinking wine. Period. In other words, the proper thing would have been that for the last 2,000 years, Yidden should not eat meat or drink wine. How do you eat meat and drink wine with the Beis HaMikdash? We're in Galus. But Ein geizern gezeira ala tzibur ella im kein reiv tzibur yichel melamed ba. We do not issue a decree unless the majority of the public can stand by it. And this is a very big rule. The Chachamim, whenever they make a gzeira takana, the first thing they have to do is they have to assess if this is something that the majority of Klal Yisrael is willing and able to accept. And if not, they do not have the right to enact that gezeira. Not only is that the truth, l'chatchila, but even b'di'eva, text 16, the Rambam says, if a court issues a decree, thinking that the majority of the community could stand by it, but after the decree was issued, the majority of the community had reservations about it, and the practice did not spread throughout the majority of the community, the decree is nullified. The decree is nullified, by the way, it doesn't mean that Bezdin nullifies it. The decree is nullified, it doesn't exist. And there's actually the Gemara, and Avodah Zarah brings an example of this, of a certain takana, if I remember correctly, it was Shem and Akum, which was made, and after a while, they went around, looked around, saw it did not stick, and that's it. It was over. It was over. So this is interesting, even though, we talk about the authority of the Bezdin, but the ultimate authority, you could say to a certain degree, will rest with Klal Yisrael, and that expresses itself in this idea that the Bezdin cannot make any gzeira or takana if Klal Yisrael. And Shem and Akum, yeah. So, with this we have concluded the third category in Torah Sheba'al Peh. So now we have received, we have derived, we have legislated, and the remaining few minutes that we have over here, we're going to talk about another area which occupies a large part of Torah Sheba'al Peh, but it's not received, it's not derived, and it's not legislated, and that is Minhagim. Minhagi Yisrael. Text 17 from the Gemara. The citizens of Beishan had the custom not to go from Tzur to Tzidon on Friday. So a little context. Market day in Tzidon was on Friday. And there was a boat. People would go by boat from Tzur to Tzidon. But the people of Beishan, they were machmer. They said, Friday, we want to prepare for Shabbos. So they did not go. Sorry? Well, obviously, if they're going on Friday, yeah. But still, that was a thing. We're not going there. Yeah. Their children went to Rabbi Yechanan and said to him, for our ancestors, this was possible. Our parents, this was a chumrah and a hidra they had. They were able to. For us, it's impossible. We need to go. We need to go to the market. So Rabbi Yechanan said to them, your fathers have already taken the stringency upon themselves, and it says, Shma bini musar avicha v'al titoish teras imecha, which is very interesting because you realize legislated Torah Shebal Peh. Where does that start from? It starts from the Bezdin, and then it becomes binding. Minig is the opposite. Minig, where does this start from? It starts from the people. And that's the fourth area of Torah Shebal Peh. But once something becomes a minig, and right now it's not the time and place to discuss the parameters, and as we have minig aviseinu Torah, text 18. Okay, so again, and then the Chassam Sofer says minig is Gehenim. We have to understand exactly when something gets the takeoff of a minig. But there is this concept of a minig. That's why Rabbi Yitzchak, when you asked before about Rabbi Yitzchak, about the hours, I'm not sure if that's a takonis, meaning that the rabbis in the different communities made that, or was that minig? Either way, it's binding. I'm talking about the waiting. In other words, the fact that some people wait this amount of hours, and other people wait that amount of hours, is that because the Bezdin in this city decided that, and the Bezdin in this city decided that, or is that it became the minig that way? And again, it's academic. Why? Because either way is binding. But the question is how it came into being. Gezeres and takanes come from top down, whereas minhagim are from bottom up. But both of them are binding, and there are many different. And there are many. The Rebbe speaks many times about specifically the power of minhagim. The ultimate dir b'tachtonim when argues minhagim. Everything else comes from above. Obviously, Torah Shabbat comes from above. Obviously, the receipt comes from above. Even the derived, we're just filling in the boxes the way that the Eibishter wants us to fill in the boxes. Then you have the legislated. Okay, that's not from above, but within Klal Yisrael, at least it's from above. The ultimate. When there's this actus of Yidden with Hashem and the Ratzon Elyon being expressed through not even the Sanhedrin, where the Ratzon of Hashem, because ultimately a minig is also expression of Ratzon Hashem. But where did that come from? From the Nashim Sadkaniyas. That's the ultimate his actus of the Elyonim and Tachtenim. Yes. Hirasha, you mean? That's we're talking about that in Hashem. Either next week or the week after, I don't remember which one it is. But we'll definitely be talking about that. And just if you want interesting, if you turn to page, you don't have it by you. Okay, but over here, by me I have it. It goes to the Seder. So you have the Seder, all these different things. So for example, the Seder plate, the Kaira is a minik. Arba cases is what? Legislated. Stakana, right? Haseba, legislated. Vegetable dipped in salt water, legislated. Hiding the afikomen, minig. Telling over the Haggadah, received. The 4 sons, derived. Washing hands before eating matzah, legislating. Eating matzah, obviously received. What? Midiraisa, right. The amount of matzah, received. But it's received. That's Alachal Meshim Sinai. Kairach, eating kairach, legislated. Eating an egg, minig. Kaishal yo, minig. So it's just interesting when you take a stroll through the Seder and seeing how it's comprised, Yiddishkeit is comprised of all these different elements, and all of this is Torah Shebal Peh. In Mir Tashem, next week, we're going to try to figure out, we're saying everything's Ratzon Elyon, then how is there such disagreement and such machlokes in what the Ratzon Elyon is? Zayigis with everyone.